Hello everyone, I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros, and this is a snippet from the game Nepomniachtchi Levon Aronian. Now you'd be wondering why we're doing this. Well, we're going to learn about the power of the bishop pair. Let's dig on in. So let's take a look at this position. Here Nepomniachtchi has the famous double Fianchetto, putting pressure on the board. But is that all Fianchettos do in these cases? Not at all. The bishop on g2 is actually, apart from controlling important central squares, is a guardian for this king on g1, making sure it doesn't get into trouble. Now there are a couple of negatives of having a Fianchetto bishop, but in this game, Nepomniachtchi is going to show why it is such a beautiful and great weapon to have. Now in this case, Levon just played b5, chasing Nepo's queen away, and the World Championship challenger moves it to f4. The whole idea and the reason he's moving the queen to f4 is that it supports any future ideas regarding the bishop on b2, and the queen can help out in case of bishop capturing the knight on f6. h6, and the queen is getting a little bit dicey over there, so he goes d3, so the queen can make a comeback. Rook f d8, queen d2, queen a7, again trying to x-ray this queen, and that wouldn't be possible if the queen was in front, because that would just lead to a trade. And the very next move here by Nepomniachtchi is a deep one, which you could find if you're familiar with hedgehog structures famously played by Garry Kasparov, among many others. But he was the first one who was very, very successful in his match versus Anatoly Karpov. So this is the moment you should try to pause and see if you can get at White's idea. So coming back here in this position, Nepomniachtchi goes for e3. By no means does he have to play e3 in this position. However, e3 is super ambitious. Remember, earlier on, he had a queen on f4 trying to put pressure on the f6 knight. Now, with the queen on d2, that was hardly possible. But he decides it's worth weakening this pawn for the dynamic idea of getting this queen over and getting closer to that king on g8. Queen b6, queen e2. So these are those dynamic trades that these super grandmasters take. They don't mind making a weakness if they get dynamic play against the opponent king. And on the other hand, you can realize there is a bishop, a Fianchetto bishop defending our king, and there is a Fianchetto bishop on pure attacking purposes. Knight b4, trying to attack it, chasing it away. Knight d5, we happily trade on d5 as Nepo, because this bishop will have direct view on black's king side. Knight takes d5, d4. And d4 is probably the strongest move in the position, opening up both bishops. Now on this bishop that was purely defensive becomes an aggressive piece, trying to put pressure on the knight on d5. So let's say c takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen b7, queen g4. You already can see how deep e3 was. The queen could maneuver to g4, press on the g7 square, and there is no turning back for this knight, for it is pinned on the long diagonal. So that is actually the reason there is such a big love for the pocket ace of chess, the bishop pair, because they're extremely strong. They put pressure on the position, and they also defend the king on g1. So obviously Aronian was not in the mood of activating and putting this or allowing that bishop in the center, so he went knight f6. And the very next move is very logical, but if you don't know, the bishops do belong on open diagonals, so Nepo is in a rush to take on c5. Rook takes d1 check, rook takes d1, bishop takes c5. And this is critical position number 2. So if you've been watching this and wondering, this looks fairly even. 2 pawns on each side, on the queen side, and 4 on the king. Why would there be any advantage for Nepomniachtchi? Well, of course, the ace of aces, the bishop pair, are still sitting pretty and putting pressure on the position, but eventually you will have to transform your advantage to something way more concrete, more tangible. So in this situation, Nepomniachtchi recalls that if you have attacking chances, it's not a drawback. In fact, it's a benefit to trade and get an opposite colored bishop middle game. So bishop takes f6, a very, very strong move by Nepo, because this is threatening to invade and get the pieces in there, not to mention a future bishop e4 trying to attack on all those squares on h7, g6, and f5. So g takes f6. Not to mention that with this trade, this square is vacant and possible for a possible invasion there. Queen h5. And actually Levon is in big trouble. Played bishop takes a3, but not many moves are any better. If black would go for the desperado of capturing here, queen takes c3, this would be dangerous, if not for this Fianchetto bishop sitting there pretty and defending all the entry squares around the king. The white king can go to king h1, and there are no checks because the bishop blocks them all. So you can again see the power of a Fianchetto bishop. So queen h5, instead of bishop e3, bishop f8 would run into rook d7, rook check, and the bishop comes in clutch, queen f7, and the mate is unavoidable on this king on g8. And if you would go the simple route of king g7, rook d7 again, rook f8, queen g4 check, chasing the king away, queen f4 again, double attacking the pawns, so there's only king g7, and out of the blue, white can go b4, and the bishop on c5 is trapped. You can't go back there. There's 2 attackers guarding that square. You can't capture because I've defended with my queen. And bishop e7 is also guarded by the rook on d7. e5 would be the last try, trying to counterattack because of the different values. But after queen g4 check, the bishop is going to be lost in the long run. So here, black decided to go bishop takes a3. Rook d7, same plan, deciding that having both pieces, both the rook and the queen on the 7th, would prove more decisive, goes after the f-pawn instead of the h1. Rook f8. Bishop e4. Now, the defensive piece that was defending our king for so long is becoming an attacker because of the opposite colored nature position. This bishop won't be able to guard the white squares. f5. And seemingly, Nepomniachtchi's, the world champion challenger's attack is just running out of fuel. But in fact, this is the beginning of the end. So try to realize what's going wrong in black's position. Note that apart from this rook, there's not many defending the king on this side of the board, while these pieces are all scattered and undefended. So here Nepo goes for queen takes h6, giving up the piece, and realizing that the queen on b6 is undefended, goes for this spectacular move of rook d5, setting up this mating idea on g5. Now you can try to stop it with bishop e7, but then there's rook h5, and you can't stop both mates on h8 or h7. f5, then there's queen h7 mate. So if you go f5, trying to close it off, then there is this idea of rook d7, setting up mates on g7 and h7. After rook f7, there's this move of queen g6. Here, queen takes f7, and checkmate is unavoidable. So after rook d5, black is just completely busted. You cannot capture. There's queen takes b6, and white is up a queen. Now, Levon did one more desperado, although the battle is basically done for. Queen takes c3, queen takes c3, e takes d5, check, queen takes d5, f5, check, king g8, and look at the magnificent technique of Ian. He goes b4, make sure the bishop is cut off, and won't be able to go back home defending the king. As we saw, that is a big benefit of having that. Queen b6, again, stopping that bishop from entering home, and also nitpicking and Pac-Manning those pawns. Rook f7 takes e3, and queen c8 check is deadly, as not only it gives a check to the king, but it attacks this bishop on c1, at the same time netting the win for Nepomniachtchi. This game is a very good example how useful it is to have fianchetto bishops. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, feel free to subscribe, and if you have any questions, do post it below. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.